Hello guys, Damodoc82 here, and we are back for the second part of my shipbuilding tutorial series, Set Sail and Conquer. So today we are going to be doing part 2 of the series, Shell Shock. And first we will be discussing main gun shell design. Why do I like to do this first? Well, the size and the shape of the shell will determine the size and the shape of the turret, which we will cover in part 3. The size and shape of the turret will ultimately determine the size and shape of the ship's hull. So that's kind of why I want to do this part first, because the shell is going to basically determine the size of everything in the end. So let's talk about what I like to use for my main guns. A lot of times I like to go with a pure gunpowder APS, which is an advanced cannon using only gunpowder for propellant. The reasons why I like to use this is it's very consistent damage from good accuracy. I usually try to shoot for about 0.2. We also have a high fire rate, and you can get about 15 to 20 RPM out of this pretty easily. An excellent velocity, about 900 to 1700 meters per second, can be difficult to target with lambs. It'll penetrate multiple layers of armor and can be effective against fast targets such as skimmers or flyers. And it is cheaper to use than railguns. They do not require railgun parts or additional systems like power generation and batteries and the fuel to run the power generation. Crams and railguns. Why don't I like crams? They have a slow fire rate. Their accuracy at long range is pretty poor. They're easily intercepted by active defenses like CWIS, missiles, interceptors, and lambs. And all the damage is concentrated into single shots, which is essentially putting all your eggs into one basket. Alright, so continuing on with the reasons why I prefer not to use railguns, they're expensive. Railgun parts are expensive, and they use materials to power them. They take up lots of volume because you also need batteries, you also need power generation for said batteries, and fuel for the power generation. And lastly, they are harder to get higher rates of fire at large gauges, where they will require much more power. So now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about actually designing the shell itself. The shell that we'll be using will be a 20 module 254 millimeter, which is about 10 inches, semi-armor piercing shell. It will use 13 gunpowder charge components, a base bleeder, 3 high explosive charges, and an AP head, or also known as armor piercing head. This is what it's going to look like in the shell customization user interface. So let's talk about why I want to use this type of shell, and we're going to be staying in the user interface for the shell customizer, and we're going to be taking a look at some statistics here. Let's look at the velocity. It's got an extremely high velocity, almost 1500 meters per second. If you want to figure out how fast that is in miles per hour, you multiply it by 2.2 to get a rough idea. And let's also look at the kinetic damage right here. That's probably going to go through about 2-3 metal beams, but we'll determine that in testing here later in the video. And it's going to be doing this damage at an armor piercing of 35.4. And let's also look at the explosive damage. Almost 2400 explosive damage. That sounds like it's going to work pretty good there. So let's have a quick talk about how SAP works. It is an armor-piercing, high-explosive shell. The AP value and kinetic damage will allow the shell to destroy several blocks, but once it has burnt through all its kinetic damage, it will explode. Just a note, you can use a pin depth fuse to make the shell explode after a certain depth or time after impact. If anyone wants to know how the damage is applied in detail, please let me know, but for the moment we're going to assume that you do know. But if I have anyone asking, I will do a video down the road to explain how that works. So Now let's quickly talk about why I like this type of shell. I know some of these I've already mentioned before, but let's just run through them again here real quick. It's very fast, so active defenses like lambs struggle to shoot it down. Good AP value and lots of kinetic damage mean that it can go through multiple layers of metal beams. It's easy to get high rates of fire. And this one's new that I haven't added before. The warheads can be easily swapped to different types to fill about any need. And of course, once again, the high velocities that make it easy to shoot down enemy craft or just fast movers in general. So next, let's talk about why I'm using this size and how did I get it. With these APS mains, I want as many shell modules as I can get, 20 modules max. There are some formulas to help you determine shell size. To determine autoloader length, you take the diameter of the shell, and then you multiply it by 20. Then after that, you divide that by 1,000, and that will give you the length of the autoloader that you will need. Now, if we want to flip this on its head and do it the other way around, to determine the diameter to get 20 modules in an autoloader, we would take the size of the autoloader, multiply it by 1,000, then divide it by 2, and that's how we get the diameter that we need. So for this shell in particular, we are going to take 254, multiply it by 20, and we get 5,080. Then we're going to take 5,080 and divide it by 1,000, and that will give us 5.08. This means we need an autoloader of about 5 meters for this shell. If you are not worried about how many modules you will have, you can take the length of the autoloader, multiply it by 1,000, and then divide it by the diameter of the shell to get the number of modules it will need. For example, we have a 6-meter autoloader, we multiply that by 1,000, and we divide that by 500, and that gives us 12 modules. Just remember though, you can only have a maximum of 20 modules for any shell. So how do I know that these formulas work? Well, heads, warheads, gunpowder charges, and rail casings, and the secondary shape charges will all have the same length as width. For example, a 500 millimeter HE warhead will always be 500 millimeters long. Fuses, bases, fins, and grav compensators will only do this up to 100 millimeter. That means the formula should only be used to get rough sizes. The extra 80 millimeter that we had left over from the shell won't matter because the base bleeder will only be 100 millimeter and we'll have plenty of room left over. So let's talk about how we're going to make these shells fire fast. The reload time for a shell to be fed into an autoloader is determined by the length of the shell without the gunpowder charges or any rail casings. So the shorter the shell, the faster the rate of fire. Here in a sec, I'll show you an example. So let's do a little side-by-side comparison here. These both have the same length when you combine the shell plus its casings for gunpowder modules. Now, let's have a look at the stats down here, the ones that I have underlined in yellow. The one on the left is the shell that we're going to be using for this tutorial series. The one on the right is one that I made for this example. Now, the one on the left, the one that we're going to be using is 1,116 millimeter, whereas the one on the right is 2,640 millimeter. Now we're going to compare that against the reload time, which is also underlined in yellow. The one on the left here says that its reload time is 71.15 seconds. Whereas we go to the one that is on the right, and it shows a reload time of 102.71 seconds. So as you can see, that is a very big difference between the two. You might worry about barrel cooldown a bit, but that can easily be managed with extra cooling. So you're probably wondering, how do I get the high muzzle velocities? You can do this by having about 3/4 to 4/5 of your shell be gunpowder. Try to go for about 900 to 1700 meters per second. So now we're going to come up with a testing rig. Let me show you how to do it. Really simple to do. We're just going to drop down one of these, and you want 254 millimeter. That'll be a 10-inch gun. And I'm not looking for a specific amount of coolers. I'm just going to stack a bunch of them on there like so. And then I believe the shell needs a 16-meter barrel. Let's just double check that real quick. $15.5, that's pretty damn close. We can work with this. Alright, so let's snap on some autoloaders. Oops, that's too big. There we go. Alright, so we don't really need to worry about the recoil absorbers for this. We are testing these at a very, very short range. We're just wanting to see how many metal beams that this can go through. And the way I like to do it is not with the fire control computer. I'm sure a lot of people probably that's be like the first thing that they would do, but I prefer doing it with an ACB because then we don't have to worry about aiming the weapon at all. And we're just going to come out here a little ways and build this little platform here that we're going to stick some metal beams on, like so. Like that. And now let's go ahead and assign these shells. And let's see, what do I need next? Right, I didn't set the ACV yet. And I probably need some ammo. Yeah, that'll get us by for now. Let's see here. I want to do this on a stim trigger. We'll just have that be L for the moment since I've already got a few of these bound to something. I'm pretty sure L isn't. So let's see. We want weapon systems, fire, and since there's only that one firing piece to worry about, we should be good. Okay. So now, let's do a test. Yep, I definitely went through 3 beams, which I think is pretty much what I was looking for. And it took more than, well, no, that's almost about half the health of that beam right there. I think they're like a 1600. Let's just see here real quick. Yeah, 1680. So yeah, that did full damage to 3 metal beams and did half damage to the one on the end. I did do a little bit of testing with this where this was like a sabot head and some solid bodies, where this went through like 4 beams. But I think we're just going to stick with this because I'd like to have the explosive damage in case it hits something juicy. But yeah, this is how I would just throw together a testing rig that way you can just pop at all day. Don't forget that you can use the Q menu to reset everything. But let me see if I can do this real quick. Okay, and we actually get to see the shell as it's leaving the barrel because I put it into slow mode. Pretty cool, right? If this was a bit further back, we'd probably be able to see it better. Let me see if I can go ahead and do that real quick so you can see what I'm talking about. Now this is just to simulate like the side of a ship here that we'd be firing at, so that's the only reason why this is here. There, okay, so let's try this again. Now, you need to hit F11 and L just in time. So hit the button that fires first and tap F11 right after. And there it is. Looking at it in mid-flight. Now keep in mind, this thing's probably going about Mach 3, Mach 4, somewhere around there, so yeah, pretty fast. And even going at 1/10 of the normal speed, it's still pretty quick. So that's just a fun thing that you can do to actually see how the shell interacts with the target. So yeah, that's how we not practice, but this is how we test out shells, or at least this is how I do it. But I think I'm going to go ahead and wrap up things there. So that said, I'd like to thank you all for watching. If you like what you've seen here today, please let me know with a like, comment, or even better, subscription. You'll have yourselves a hell of a day, and keep your arm high. Later, guys.